This is the voice of the Alex 7000 master computer, granting you access to the OSI files.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to an all-new episode of the OSI Files. I did that last week. I don't know what was going on. I kept saying the OS Files. This is the OSI Files, and I am the director of the OSI Files, John S. Drew here, welcoming you back to a new episode here on Facebook Live Friday night. And we're talking about the second episode of the $6 Million Man's first season, Survival of the Fittest. And we're going to get into that with two guests I will bring on in a short period of time here. But first, before we do that, like we do in every episode here, let's get a little bit of a historical perspective. This episode aired on January 25th, 1974. And, let's take a little look at that here.
Accessing OSI Historical Databank.
On this day, January 25th, 1974, Henry Kissinger revealed that he was the target of the Plumbers, a group within the White House that had been put together to investigate leaks to the press. Kissinger, based on his rising popularity, had been suspected of passing on information to the press. Also on this day, a report determined that pot could have an effect on your immune system. The report from researchers at Columbia University offered proof for the first time that marijuana can cause cellular damage. In music, singer Al Wilson became a one-hit wonder with his song Show and Tell. It was at the top of the charts for only 1 week. In theaters, as we've said, The Exorcist continued its dominance of the box office.
My name is Theo Kojak. It's interesting how matter-of-fact death can become. I can remember the first day I was on the force, an automobile accident. There was a lot of blood all over the car. I went to the side of the road and threw up. Now there are two girls, 20 and 22, mutilated beyond anything I'd ever seen. And I can look at it and only wonder who did it and why.
On television, the CBS Friday night movie featured Telly Savalas in the 1973 Marcus Nelson murders. Savalas plays Detective Kojak for the first time, looking into the murder of two young women in their Manhattan apartment. NBC's offering of Lots of Luck had Stanley and Bummy trying out their unsuccessful vaudeville act for the company show. And that's your brief look at January 25th, 1974.
Accessing OSI Mission Briefing.
So, as you can tell from my voice, I'm a little off because the weather's gotten warm very quickly here in the New York area, and the pollen is ridiculous. And I don't usually get affected by that. So I'm hoping you will be patient as I welcome to our show. First off, on Facebook Live here commenting, Jerry Lang, who joined us last week, saying, hey guys, and Teddy Ray, hi guys, looking forward to this. And we're looking forward to sharing it with you, Teddy. Guys, comment here. If you're here tonight on Facebook Live, comment as we're talking here. We'll share those comments on the screen here as we go along. Now, I want to bring in our guests for this evening. Joining me tonight is a familiar face to podcasting, but not as much to my podcast here, although he was just on this past Sunday on the Chronic Rift. Welcome to the podcast, author Bobby Nash. Hey, Bobby.
Hey, Jim. Thanks for having me. My first time doing a video podcast, by the way.
Well, there you go. There's always a first time for everything.
Yes.
And also, go ahead there. I'm sorry.
Hopefully I won't embarrass myself too much. Yeah.
No, we're just here to have fun. There's nobody getting embarrassed here. We're talking $6 Million Man. The only thing that's embarrassing is when people think I'm crazy for not liking Day of the Robot. Oh, well. Also joining us here is actually a familiar face to the Chronic Rift because he does a feature monthly on our Chronic Rift in Review episodes. He's a longtime fan of the $6 Million Man, an artist in his own right, Mr. Ken Holtzhouser. Hey, Ken.
Hello. Hello, Mr. and Mrs. America and all the ships at sea. Also, welcome to the OSI Files. This is great. It's my first time video podcasting as well, so please be gentle.
I'm not alone.
I'm told I'm a gentle sort, so we'll see. So, as we do here in every episode, I want to get things started with our look at the TV guide for that week. Now, I made a mistake last week. I said that it was only the premiere episode of $6 Million Man that actually got some ad coverage in TV Guide. And it turns out, if you turn to the Friday night listing, there he is, sort of looming right at you as you've got the city overhead. It's almost like he's just hovering over the city, is Lee Majors. Now a weekly series. In all the world, there's no man like Steve Austin, the man to whom scientists gave superhuman powers to perform feats no one else would dare. Lee Majors stars. I love TV Guide ads. As a kid, I used to clip them out of them and actually collect them in a little, like how some girls would have their teeny bopper scrapbook. I had my TV Guide scrapbook.
I will admit that was one of the first magazines I was a devoted reader to as a child as well.
Yeah. Now, the episode listing itself, let me find it here. Here you go. The way they describe it is this, and this is also funny too, because it's always interesting how they get this information and then how they interpret it. Stranded on an island after surviving a plane crash, Steve and his friend Oscar, think they're safe from danger. They are unaware that some of their fellow passengers are assassins hired to kill diplomat Oscar, played by Richard Anderson. He's a diplomat.
It's good of them to make that connection. That's good.
Yeah.
Not that he's his boss, or anything like that. But he was there doing negotiations, so I guess you could say he's a diplomat.
Yes.
Yeah.
The Russians, correct? He was doing secret negotiations, if I recall correctly.
Yes, secret negotiations with the Russians. That's right. Yeah.
That's not time at all.
No, not at all.
Not at all.
Well, this is something else I'm sadly discovering now as I'm watching this show, where we when we first started reviewing $6 Million Man a few years back, we were all like, oh, hey, the Russians and all that kind of stuff. It's all over now. It just seems funny that, they're all worried about the Russian threat and everything. And look at where we are today. Oh, man.
Everything comes back around.
Yep. It's true. Everything does come back around. Yeah. Now, really quick, going to take a look here also at the guest cast that TV Guide lists here. And I always get a kick out of that too, because there are some names here that you're like, how are they considered part of the guest cast? First off, we've got Maxwell, played by William Smith, who is a longtime television character actor. That one I get. For that matter, I also get Cromwell, played by James McEachin. Those two I get. Then we come to Colby, played by Christine Belford. Christine Belford, who is also, again, another mainstay of television in the 60s, 70s, through the 80s. I don't know if she's as active now, though, is she?
I don't
know. She was just driving me nuts while I was watching the episode. I knew I recognized her from something. She was Baroness von Gunther on Wonder Woman, wasn't she?
Yes, she was. Yes, she was.
Appropriate comic book kudos to her.
Yeah. Speaking of comic book kudos there, Ken, while we're on the subject there, this episode was written by Mann, Rubin, and directed by Leslie H. Martinson. And that name should ring a bell to you.
Oh, certainly. The director of Batman from 1966.
That's right, yeah. That was kind of a thrill. I'd completely forgotten about that he had actually but directed that particular episode.
It's good work on his part too. I mean, there's a lot of things that he's doing to make what was probably just a standard TV budget look really big. I mean, there's a lot of set pieces to the episode.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Continuing along here, next after where have we got her? We got Colby. Next comes one of our suspects in this, because that's the beauty of this whole thing. It's this mystery to try and figure out who it is that is, trying to kill Oscar. All we know is that his name is Bobby. But we have Barris, played by Randall Carver. Now, I don't recognize, but my wife swears she did as we were watching it this evening.
And his first name was Robert.
That's right. Yeah,
yes.
He was Robert, and then there was Roberts, who was the sergeant, played by W.T. Zacha, who is one of my favorite. I don't know why. I love W.T. Zacha. I think that for some reason I've seen him in more episodes of $6 Million Man and Bionic Woman than he actually really appeared in for some reason. I'm just fascinated with him. Yeah.
He's a solid 70s style authority figure. He's got that look, he's got that delivery. Yeah, I could buy him in just about any military or police part.
Right. Jerry points out he was a heavy in a couple of episodes of 6 Mil and Bionic Woman. He also, surprisingly enough, wrote a couple of episodes of 6 Mil and Bionic Woman.
Quite the polymath.
What's that?
Say he was quite the polymath.
Yes, he was. And we also have a surprise guest appearance here. One I want to talk about with you guys in a little more detail, because I still scratch my head a little and go, why? As much as I love her, Joanne Worley as Mona. Why?
That is, I guess they felt like it was such a heavy episode. They needed the laughs. They needed a couple of laughs.
Yeah, they needed the laughs, but the laughs are so sparse throughout the episode. It's like, why?
And she really adds nothing to the episode.
No.
So I've got to disagree. She's a sore thumb in the episode that I don't understand what her presence is. Nothing that she does is terribly funny. Therefore, I'm endlessly fascinated by everything that she's doing in the episode.
Yeah.
I want her to get a spin-off.
Now, yeah. Now,
the lady in the yellow.
Had she turned out to be Bob, that would have been a nice twist. But the goofiness was a front. Yeah. But,
yeah, that's true. The whole thing is at the end, she just turns snarling sinister as she's got the gun on Steve and Oscar or something. Yeah, that's, and we're going to be bringing it up from time to time here in the episode. As many fans know, this episode was redone with the Bionic Woman as Fly Jamie. And sadly, it's beat for beat the exact same story. We don't even get a twist on the mystery. Bobby is a woman, as we'll find out here in this episode as well. So it would have been kind of cool if maybe Vito Scotti, who was the comic relief in Fly Jamie, turned out to be the Bobby bad guy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. We also have, for those Battlestar Galactica fans, Helen, played by Laurette Sprang, who I happened to crush on quite a bit when I was a kid.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, she was a beauty. I think she did one other episode, too. I think she was in The Bionic Boy.
Mm-hmm.
I think she was Greg Evigan's girlfriend, if I remember correctly.
Oh, in the 1970s, who wasn't Greg Evigan's girlfriend?
Yeah, that's true. That's true. And then finally, rounding out the guest cast according to TV Guide, the captain of the plane, played by Dale Johnson. Now, he doesn't fare well in this episode. He and the flight crew die, but oddly enough, when we get to the Bionic Woman, they come back. They're the exact same flight crew, and they survive the crash. which I don't get.
I was struck by how the entire flight crew looked like Bryan Cranston. They were all just like a variety of different kinds of Bryan Cranston.
Yeah, that's true. You got a point there. You got a point. I like that. Certainly, Johnson certainly looks like Bryan Cranston there from the side of him there. Oh, man, that's funny. That's funny. Now, okay, taking a look at this, and again, I want to come back to Mona for a moment there, because we did start talking about her there. You know, I know it's the guest spot and everything, and like you said, Bobby, it might have been cooler if she'd actually been the, villain in the piece. But the one thing, I never really questioned her being there before, other than as an odd plot choice, maybe humorous moments and stuff. But for the longest time, whenever I watched this episode, I always thought that the flight was a mix of military and civilian. And it was only this time that I caught it that they said military and cargo. So I'm like, okay, then what the hell is she doing on this flight? And there's only one little line she talks about, that her husband's a pilot. And I thought maybe she's a military wife.
Maybe she's steerage.
Right. Because, for her, because she doesn't actually say her husband's in the military, just that he's a pilot.
Right.
And he told her not to fly, and, she didn't listen to him. The fact that she ends up on the wrong flight, too, I'm really curious. Did she, get on, was she supposed to take Delta to New York and got on the wrong, there's a whole, I just don't understand how she ended up on the wrong flight.
Right. And I would have thought that, considering they were specific about saying it was a military flight, that someone would have flagged her and said, ma'am, you're getting on the wrong plane. Because when you see everybody else, even the background extras, they're all in uniform.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Pretty much except for her and Steve and Oscar, everybody's pretty much in uniform.
Right. I
don't know, maybe she's color guard. Representing lemon yellows.
Maybe. It's funny, too, because, we talk about, Steve and Oscar there. And one thing you both pointed out when I asked you what scenes stood out to you as being memorable, both of you pointed out, we're going to talk about the most memorable scene a little later on in the show, but you said some of the things that pointed out to you were the Steve-Oscar scenes, and yet you each had different ones that to you sort of solidified or showed their relationship. Bobby, which was yours?
I really love the stuff at the beginning of the episode when Steve and Oscar are driving to meet the plane, and they have the flat tire, and there's this friendly riff back and forth between them, and then as they're changing the tire, it's this funny bit where Oscar goes, "Oh, there's no jack," and Steve's like, "No problem," and we see him do his bionic, with the wonderful sound effect of him pulling the lug wrenches off. And as he's lifting it up, Oscar brings the spare over, sets the spare on the hood. It felt like two characters talking. It does nothing to advance the plot, but it's made these guys. You don't have to tell me these guys are. You don't have to tell me any of that, because how they're interacting with each other here tells me everything I need to know about their friendship.
Yeah, that's true. I'll give you that. And it's interesting, too, because I didn't realize it until, watching this episode again, just how much bionics are used in this particular episode. Because we don't get the bionic sound effects, so we take it for granted. Whether it's, the car changing and he has to lift the car, when they're on the plane and he's got to, pry open the door because it's jammed. They can't seem to open it up. And then on the island itself, the most famous thing, of course, is the leaping down scene, because it's the first time Steve leaps from a great height. But there's so much more. There's a lot of running. There's the whole thing where he's throwing the rock at one of the bad guys, knocking him out.
Right.
He uses his bionic eye for the first time. Twice.
And also, too, in these early episodes, it also he seems less strong as the show progresses. He looks like, even though he's lifting the car up, it's still a little heavy. or when he's having trouble getting the door open. Season 4, Steve would have just popped that door open no problem on the plane.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas and maybe that was because they didn't have that sound effect. Or this was a way to show that it was something that not ordinary people could do, was that it was a little slower for him to do it. But he's putting that effort into opening that door. And I think that adds a little something that Steve's not, even though he's got this great power, he's not Superman.
Right. Yeah. Well, I do think that, Bobby, you're right about one thing. Like early on, I mean, as we're going to see in upcoming episodes, there's, he manages to damage his arm just because the equivalent of a street lamp is swung at him by another stronger man and such. And the thing is, when we get to Fly Jamie kicks open the plane door. Whereas Steve has to use and strains to just turn the handle. Jamie kicks the damn thing open. But Ken, you also said, you appreciated the relationship between Steve and Oscar, but you had a different scene that stood out to you in highlighting that relationship.
Oh, sure. I was really, I guess the scene that really kind of jumped out at me was the first scene where they're in the airplane. And Oscar is being very defensive about what he's been doing, kind of shifty, a little paranoid. Steve's giving him massive side-eye throughout the whole thing. But at the same time, I get this impression that Steve he's just looking at him with this feeling that Oscar has a lot more on his shoulders than just him. And maybe it was important for him to kind of recognize that even with his fantastic abilities and the things that he does, he's just a small part of Oscar Goldman's complete world. That and the eyebrow raising, of course, was a big deal for me too.
You like the eyebrow raising?
I will tell you that as a young lad watching this, 5 or 6 or whatever I was in 1974, I was so impressed by Lee Major's ability to independently raise an eyebrow that I would sit on my bed and practice just pushing an eyebrow up until I was able to manipulate my eyebrow independently of itself. I attribute that entirely to Lee Major.
That's an unexpected Bobby guy.
Wait, what were you saying?
That's just an unexpected side effect of the Bond guy being able to lift the eyebrow.
Well, it's funny. I don't know if either of you have the DVD sets, but one of the bonuses features, they're interviewing Lee about various aspects of the show and such, and he points out that he was told by a director on Big Valley to stop raising the eyebrow. He said, "You'll never make it in this business because that just looks weird or whatever." And Lee didn't listen to him. And he's like, now it's like I got kids all over the country, during $6 Million Man trying to raise their eyebrow.
See, there you go.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
He knew what the kids of America wanted.
Right. Now, Ken, you also pointed out when we were talking through the survey and stuff, you pointed out Steve being the alpha in this episode very quickly. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. You've got a plane full of military personnel of a variety of ranks and a variety of services, and absolutely everybody falls in line behind Steve as the alpha almost immediately.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if it's a swanky 70s corduroy or whatever it is, but boy, everybody immediately recognizes that he's the top dog, and they, to a one, would crawl on their belly across that beach if Steve told them that was what they needed to do.
Yeah. I like the fact there's a scene where the one officer comes up and introduces himself just because he recognizes him as, because, Steve is famous. He's an astronaut.
Yep.
In the 70s, I mean, there's nobody more famous than people that went to space. And so not only is he, which is why it always amazed me that Oscar used him for undercover work, but he's not only famous, he was also being a colonel. What you talk about with him being the alpha comes across from that. Yeah, he says, let's do this. And they're yes, sir, let's get right on it.
Yeah. It's funny. I didn't pick up how, especially considering when you look at Steve and the way Lee Majors played him and everything, he was always so low key. He would only assert himself when he absolutely had to. And yet here he is in this situation, and maybe, he's also the highest ranking out of the military across the different types that are on the plane. But they do accede to him very quickly. They do listen to him very quickly. And we pointed that out too last week, how Steve just walks into the base camp and it's like, get me my NASA suit. I'm going, and it's like, okay. And it's only when Oscar's like turning around and telling the base commander, under no circumstances you go in there. Well, too late. He's on his way.
It might just be that Robert Mitchum style masculinity that he was portraying when he would come out on screen. He was clearly an alpha no matter what situation you dropped him into.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. Now, the mystery of Bobby, I mentioned it before. It because you've got Lieutenant Roberts, you've got a character named Roberts, you've got two women who, when you finally start putting it together, it could be either one of them. In terms of either, because they could be Bobby, Barbara for short, and what have you, and then you've got Mona, and I still come back to what Bobby said before. Oh, by the way, Bobby, you could also be the bad guy in this. Bobby's kind of quiet now. He's like, "How do you know I'm not?" or is Bobby frozen? Bobby?
Hope he didn't get bitten by a blackface snake.
What was that they said? The blackface snake?
Yeah.
The deadliest of them?
Oh, yes.
Yeah. They had to let you know that. And why did it have to be blackface snake? I mean, I've never heard that before.
They're big fans of Al Jolson, I guess.
Oh, my God. Bobby, you there?
I felt like the only thing missing on this island was a big puddle of quicksand. They had so many other island tropes that he dealt with.
Not gonna lie, I was hoping for quicksand too.
Yeah, it was kind of a 70s thing,
Right, but the whole thing was a 70s trope in the sense of it being like a disaster movie. I mean, just the whole, we've got this plane full of people and these different personalities. You've got Roberts, you've got Robert, the failing doctor, who is squeamish about everything. You've got Roberts, who's there with Mona, and I gotta admit, that's one thing I kind of thought was cool, was that W.T. Zacha got to play off Joanne Worley in the episode.
Yeah, they made a nice combo.
Oh.
Yeah, they did.
Plus they used a lot of the other stuff, like the plane disaster films were big in the 70s, with all like the airport movies and et cetera, et cetera. Plus the fact that even though we don't see the submarine, the fact that there was a submarine there. So there was a lot of the stuff that we were seeing in movies really moved over. They translated a lot of that stuff into the show.
Right. Now, when I saw the $6 Million Man, the both of you, I think, come from it as having remembered seeing it from the very beginning, even if your memories of that first season are spotty. But am I correct, or was I wrong there? You both watched the show originally in its first run.
Oh, yes.
No, later seasons, I mean, this one aired in January of 74.
Right.
I was 2.
Okay.
So I...
So you were in the same boat.
I don't remember.
You don't remember? So you were in the same boat I was, Bobby, in the sense that you watched later seasons. So your introduction to $6 Million Man, and for that matter, then Bionic Woman, was that you were by then used to the sound effects and such.
That's correct.
Yeah.
That's correct. When I saw them as a kid, and I'm sure I saw them in reruns and all this as well, but it wasn't until when it really struck me that the differences of the early seasons was in, I want to say, the late 90s or maybe early 2000s, the Sci-Fi Channel or one of the cable channels started playing episodes of The $6 Million Man. And I had not seen them since I was a kid. And watching them in order, I had forgotten that there were no sound effects, especially for the Bionics in those early ones. Or I'd actually forgotten that we had a different Rudy in the early ones.
Right.
So little things like that just I had forgotten because I was so used to where they were when I started watching them.
Now, in terms of that then, Bobby, coming back and watching then this first season, were you disappointed by the lack of sound effects?
Actually, no, not really. It's jarring when you're used to them. It's jarring. But I see what they were doing, and there are times when I think it works not having them because they did other things to show it. I know this is not this episode, but I know last week's episode, we don't have when he's running carrying that steel rod with the concrete on the bottom that he throws to the truck.
Right.
As he's running, there's no bionic sound, but what they did was put over this thing of his heart beating.
Part of these shows that latch themselves to you when you're a child, I think there are certain imitatable and repeatable aspects to them. Batman certainly had that. Star Trek, Lost in Space. I know for myself, watching that back in 74, 75 and on, my family could very easily imitate the bionic sound effect or the slow motion running through the house after the episode was over, and like picking up the coffee table by making sound effects and with great effort with one arm as a child, all that kind of little stuff that just makes the show more memorable because it was so easy to imitate.
Now, Teddy Ray says, I was 13 in 74, loved and watched them all, except for all of season 2. Our affiliate for ABC didn't show it, but as I watched them in reruns later, I knew everything they cut out, loved the sound effects, and really missed them. Now, it's funny, Teddy Ray points that out because, you know, when you talk about the ABC affiliates, one of the other things I notice about these episodes, and especially now going back, the affiliates were funny. How they would sometimes not show shows on the nights they were supposed to be according to the network. Because if you look at, like, for instance, I bought a TV guide recently for an upcoming episode, and the $6 Million Man's not listed at all. Because the thing is, I'm getting these TV guides from dealers and stuff, from from antique places and stuff, and they've got different market ones. So I've got one from Atlanta, and I've got one from California, and I've got one from New York. You know, it's not consistent. If I try to do that, I'll go crazy. But then you get to one, and then for a particular week, $6 Million Man didn't air on that Friday night, even though it was listed in most TV listings. But in that particular market, they decided to show something else. So then what they do is, later on the next week, like maybe Wednesday night, $6 Million Man would get a special airing so that at least the episode would air. But it's just very strange how sometimes back then, you know, not everybody showed. And I mean, I know there were certain instances where that happened, like the famous story of Star Trek where, you know, the South went dark with over the kiss with Kirk and Uhura, but, you know, or areas of the South, I should say. But like, this was something that was common practice, that if there was a local event or some other movie or something the affiliate wanted to show, they could apparently supersede the network programming.
Mm-hmm.
See, the affiliates had a lot more power over programming in the 70s than they did any other time after that.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's one of those things too. And that was in the day where if you missed it, you missed it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, that's one thing I kind of regret about today because, you know, if you miss it, I'll catch it in the morning on Hulu or on demand or something. You know, we had to be good kids. I'll always say, you know, when it came to Doomsday is Tomorrow, I remember being on my best behavior because I wanted to know next week if we were all going to survive or if Jamie managed to save us from being destroyed.
And, of course, you got that one really mean kid on the playground if you missed the episode to be like, oh, yeah, Steve Austin threw a bear into outer space. Oh, man, did I miss it.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. Now, I did also ask you to talk about your memorable moments from the episode. And, Bobby, you had mentioned and you also well, no, it wasn't in connection with it. It's something different. You pointed out the snake scene as being memorable to you.
Yes. Because that was also, you know, it was Steve doing the bionic running. But it's also one of those things that I didn't notice it the first time, but in my rewatch this week, when he gets there just as the snake leaps at Oscar, and the snake actually hits Steve's bionic arm first, and Steve slings it. You know, he basically uses his arm as a shield against the snake, and then of course he throws the snake. Snake drops and all this, but it's just one of those. It's a very well shot scene, considering Richard Anderson and the snake are shot ever. You know, it's a very well shot scene that you still feel that snake's right there next to Oscar and about to get him. Right. And you know, and I've said this for years. Nobody runs like, you know, I'm hard pressed to think of anyone that runs exactly the same way he does. And he manages to, when he runs, you feel like he's going faster than he is, even though he's in slow motion. So there's something about the way he runs that really works.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's true. It's funny, though, because, like, that was one thing that to this day still stands out in my mind, is that when he does throw that snake against the rock, we don't get the bionic sound effect or anything, but we do get that. To me, it's a sickening, like, thud sound when it hits the rock.
Right.
Yeah.
No.
But Ken, you and I are both in agreement about the scene with the cauterizing of the wound.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. Hold that there for a second. I want to, like, show that scene here. I've got the audio for it as well, and we'll come back from that. Let's talk about that.
I can sew up cuts in skin, but not veins. It's not the same thing.
Look, Barris, he's going to die. Now, there must be some other way to stop bleeding.
Sure, if we were in a hospital.
What would you do?
We'd cauterize it.
Two hot electrical wires?
That's right.
Give me the scalpel. Come on, give it to me. As long as you live, forget what you're gonna see. Is that clear?
Yes, sir. You're cutting your finger.
It's all right, it doesn't hurt.
Those wires.
Hang in there, Barris. Don't quit on me now. All right, take my hand. Come on, take it. Two hot electrical wires. Cauterize a vein. One. Hang in there, Barris.
There. That's the spot. Right there. It worked. We did it. The bleeding stopped.
Can you get the bullet out now?
Yes, sir.
Well, then do it. And Barris, I don't want to hear any more about how you fall apart under pressure.
No, sir. And, thank you, sir.
And, you know, of course, to me, it's funny because if this was later on in the series, this scene would go a lot faster. It may not even have occurred as detailed as it was. I mean, there's the whole thing of cutting him open and then cutting Steve open and getting in there and stuff. And Ken, you had a great comment as we were watching it there. I had to laugh when you said that about Steve's hand.
It's a great scene. I mean, you're sitting there with Bobby, the shakiest surgeon in the East, and he's terrified to do anything to help. But it's an effective way to demonstrate that Steve is a cyborg without having him pick up a car or run really fast or do whatever. I mean, it plays with the implication of his being a cyborg in a way that the show hadn't done yet. And I thought that was just a really clever scene. And, of course, I can't help but watch it and think that they're sticking their finger in poor Richard Anderson's belly button and every so often, get you cue.
And also, you know, with Dr. already, of course, Steve does not make things better by going, you need to forget what you've seen here today. Never speak of it again. But I always wonder what became of him, maybe, because, you know, in sucked into the OSI in some form or fashion.
That's possible. I mean,
later had him transferred or yeah.
Right. You know, well, the thing is though, is that, you know, we always joke about this in Bionic fandom is it's, you know, the worst kept secret in all of OSI is Bionics because, you know, almost every other week Steve and Jamie are dropping level 6s on everybody because they got to reveal the Bionics some way or another. But to me, Steve doing it at this point in the series is still impressive, even though, yeah, we laugh at the whole, you know, Bionics thing, but here's Steve sort of letting down his veneer because he's still not comfortable yet with being bionic. He's not 100% totally with it. We saw in the previous episode the way he snapped at Penny Fuller's character when she asked him, what's it like being bionic? And he's like, what do you think it is? It's peachy, you know, and he's not 100% behind his bionics yet and with it to the point where it's that easy for him to go, just do it. You see he even struggles with it for a moment, and that's part of what plays out and makes that scene run a little longer.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Yeah.
And if it was anybody other than Oscar, you may wonder if he would have even gone through this or not.
Yeah, I don't know. See, that's a good question. I mean, he's still Steve Austin, though. To me, any life is worth. I mean, Oscar especially. Maybe it might have taken him a little longer. I don't know, but I can't help but feel he still would have done something. You know. Well,
and as a side note, Lorette Sprang's character just kept hanging around with poor shaky Bobby like the whole episode, and I don't know. Every opportunity, the poor guy made a Jerry Lewis spaz of himself throughout the entire episode. Practically wet himself when the plane was going to crash, was completely useless on the beach. At some point, I had to wonder if there was another more eligible bachelor for her to get herself attached to from the wreckage of that plane.
Well, there was something to her because I don't know if you caught this. When she first is introduced in the episode and she and Roberts are talking to each other, he's reading one of his medical journals and he's talking about how at one time he was going to be a doctor and now it's all a hobby and everything. The next time they cut to the two of them, she's reading the medical journal.
Mm-hmm.
You know.
I did see that, yeah.
You know, so she took a shining to him in some way that now she's actually even reading the books. You know? Well, gentlemen, we're starting to run out of time here, but before we do, I wanted to ask, was there anything about the episode in particular you wanted to cover? And I'll start with Bobby.
Okay, well, I'm a sucker for any time their stories take place where they're out in the wild. You know, some of my favorite episodes of $6 Million Man is Steve either in the mountains or in the woods or in the forest or somewhere out in nature. So So this one hits on a lot of the right notes for me. You know, I love seeing Steve. Because have you mentioned earlier, this is the first time we see Steve leap from a great height.
Yes.
This is the first time we see Steve use the bionic eye. There's a lot here, and that really sets the tone of the series going forward. And there's just a lot of funny stuff here, but really, as cool as all that is, the relationship between Steve and Oscar in this episode is probably my favorite thing that I take away from it. Like when, you know, the other good line is the one where, you know, Steve's got he's been gathering supplies. He leaps down at Oscar, and Oscar is like, you know, this is impressive. Oscar goes, "You look like a bionic Santa Claus," you know. And so it's that nice, and I think a lot of that, I don't know how much of that was on the paper and how much of that is the actors.
Right.
But, you know, or if it's a nice combination of both. But certainly the chemistry between those two actors, I think it certainly solidifies that relationship, because you just bought these were two guys that got along.
Right. Yeah. Well, you know, and that's the thing, because, you know, in the movies, Oscar and Steve were adversarial, something that they'd started from the very beginning with the pilot movie. You couldn't do that on a weekly basis back then. Right. I mean, now, yeah, I guess you could have that kind of relationship with your boss where it's more of a grudging respect. But over time, the two are going to become close personal friends.
Yeah. I think I'm glad they didn't keep that going. Yeah, I'm glad. Because through the series, I mean, this is because of how well these two guys know each other. As we see in, you know, later episodes, where like Oscar gets kidnapped or replaced, or, you know, these little things that they know about each other.
Right. Right. Now, Ken, what about you?
Well, I think Bobby hit a lot of the high points. Certainly, in my mind's eye, when I see Steve Austin doing amazing things, I see him in like a woodland or a jungle setting, leaping from tall areas and running, slow, but fast. It's exciting. I mean, you've got a show that's a little bit espionage, and you've got a little bit of almost cartoony superheroics and disaster movie. You've got all of these great things going on. And I feel like I've got to say it again. The bizarre non sequitur of getting Joanne Worley away from another episode of Love American Style to put her right smack dab in the middle of an action adventure TV series is the most bafflingly wonderful 1970s thing I could have imagined. If had the villain been, say, Captain Cloud or something, that would have been just the icing on the cake.
Well, you know, here's the thing. We're now at the second episode of this new series. Now, last week, when it premiered in January of 1974, I'm forgetting the exact date, I'm blanking on it here. Hang on. That would be January 19th, 18th, January 18th. Population Zero came in 10th place. Fantastic numbers. 24.2 million people watched the premiere of The $6 Million Man. Now, I wasn't able to get viewing numbers, but I was able to get a ranking for this episode in the Nielsen's. It still remained in the top 20 for the week. Now, I ask you, start with Ken. Ken, where do you think this episode of Survival of the Fittest, sorry, I'm blanking for a second there, Survival of the Fittest, where do you think it ranked in the top 20?
I am going to suggest that it elevated. I'm going to go with number 6.
Number 6, okay. And Bobby, where do you think it wound up?
I would love to agree, but I know sometimes the second episodes tend to lose ground. So I figure it may have dropped to 12.
Okay. Well, first off, last week as well, Happy Days premiered on ABC, and it was in 15th place. It was the other big ABC show premiering that week, and it came in 15th. It dropped to 21. The number one show for that week was All in the Family. $6 Million Man placed 13th. So, Bobby, you were closer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's one of those things. It's like there's always because there's a lot of people that because they ABC probably really hyped it too for that first night,
Right.
and there's a lot of people that watched it just for that, and then they're like, oh, okay, and then they don't come back the next week, or I assume they were on the same days both weeks, and because I know back in the 70s a lot of times premiere episodes would be Sunday night movies or Sunday night episodes, and then they would move to their regularly scheduled night the next week.
Right.
I don't know if that was the case here.
No, it wasn't. It premiered on Friday night. It was placed smack between the Brady Bunch and Happy Days, Odd Couple, and which it was also this week as well, between the two. In fact, I found an article that Tony Randall was not happy that the lead into Odd Couple was the $6 Million Man.
It does seem an odd pairing of those three shows together.
Right. Yeah.
Well, after a while, I don't think you found a lot of TV shows that were premiering at the half hour mark.
True.
There seemed to be a clear line of like the first hour would be comedies, the second hour would be an adventure show, and then the third hour would be something for the grown-ups, like a cop drama or something like that.
Right.
It's very strange for that to break up into a 7 o'clock show, a 7:30, and an 8, or on the East Coast, and an 8 and an 8:30, and etc.
Right. Exactly. Now, before we wrap things up here, I want to play a little game with you here. I did this last week and we had some fun with it. It's a this or that type of game. Now, as I mentioned early on at the start of the show, I'm fascinated with the actor by the name of W.T. Zacha, who played Sergeant Roberts, in this episode. He also appeared in several other episodes of $6 Million Man and Bionic Woman. He wrote a couple of episodes. For some reason, I've always had this thing that he appeared in even more episodes than he actually did, and that he's as much of a mainstay of these two shows as, say, Jim and Helen or Callahan and such. But that is not the case. That is just something in my head. But I wanted to play a game with you called W.T. Zacha, or this other 70s mainstay that I was fascinated with, C.W. McCall. C.W. McCall, famous singer for Convoy, among others. Yeah. So here's what I want to do. I'm going to name for you a title. It's either the title of a song by C.W. McCall or an episode of $6 Million Man or Bionic Woman that W.T. Zacha either appeared in and or wrote. Because in some he actually appeared and wrote the episode. So what I'm going to do is this. I'm going to start with Ken. All right? Ken, if you get it wrong, Bobby gets the point. If you get it right, you get the point. And then same thing. Then I'll go to Bobby. And if Bobby gets it right, he gets the point. But if he gets it wrong, you get the point. Because this time it's an either or. Last week it was an either or both. So at least we had that option there. But I can tell you neither of them ever had the same title for a song in an episode. So... All right, so Bobby, I give you the first title. Is this a W.T. Zacha episode or a C.W. McCall song? Classified.
This is completely a guess, but I'm gonna go with C.W. McCall song.
That is correct. It was a C.W. McCall song. Ken, A Thing of the Past.
I will guess that that's an episode.
That is an episode for W.T. Zacha. Specifically, it's an episode of The Bionic Woman from the first season. One of the better ones, in fact. All right. Bobby, Hocus Pocus.
Okay, that sounds like an episode.
That is an episode of the show. Wow, very good. That was a $6 Million Man episode, the first time he was testing out the mustache. He put on a little thin one. It was a fake mustache. Made him look like Rhett Butler. All right.
Or little.
Or what?
Or Little Richard, perhaps.
Okay, Ken. Roses for Mama.
That would be C.W. McCall.
That would definitely be C.W. McCall. Correct. All right, we got a tie game going here. Bobby, Wolf Creek Pass.
That's a tough one. I'm gonna go with episode.
No.
Nope.
That's a C.W. McCall episode or song. I'm sorry, not episode, song.
I've got that song on my jukebox. I know that one.
Okay. All right. Ken, The Peeping Blonde.
Oh, good Lord. I'm going to guess C.W. McCall.
Oh, it is a $6 Million Man episode.
Oh, how creepy.
It's actually an episode that Farrah Fawcett guest starred on.
Ooh la la.
Yeah, she played a reporter who manages to get footage of Steve in Bionic Action and blackmails him for the whole story.
The Peeping Blonde.
Yep. All right, Bobby, we come back to you. Knight Rider.
I'm going to guess C.W. McCall because I don't really recall that one from a show.
Yep, it is C.W. McCall. It is C.W. McCall. All right, Ken, you got an easy one this time. Kill Oscar.
That will have to be an
Both.
Both. It is an episode. It is actually the $6 Million Man episode, and W.T. Zacha wrote it.
Yeah.
Yep.
Nice.
Yeah, very nice. All right, we're coming now down to the final two. We've still got a tie game here. Bobby, Aurora Borealis.
Oh, lordy. I'm going to go with episode.
I'm afraid it's a C.W. McCall song. C.W. McCall song. All right, Ken, you can either tie this game up and we end it that way at a tie, or you can win this one. It's Ghost Town.
I'm going to say that's an episode.
I'm afraid that's also a C.W. McCall song. Sorry.
No shame.
Great episode title.
It is, right? I think if I remember correctly, that actually was the title of a Secrets of Vices episode, though, was Ghost Town. I think. If I remember correctly. Well, gentlemen, you tied. It's a split, decision here on the two of you here for this or that this week.
Nothing but winners here.
That's exactly it. That's it. Now, before we finish up here, there's one more bit of business to do here, and that's to talk about whether or not you would suggest this episode to someone who's trying out the series for the first time. So, Ken, I'm going to start with you. What are your thoughts? Would you offer this and say, hey, take a look at this. This is a pretty good example of $6 Million Man.
Sadly, as good as the episode is, I would say probably not, because I don't know that it's necessarily a strong showcase for Steve as much as it's sort of a world builder episode. It's absolutely an episode I would say is the second one you should watch. But I don't know if I'm prepared to say that I would put this on in front of somebody who was not familiar with the show at all and said, here, this will explain it all.
Okay.
Not quite in the same way that last week's episode, Population Zero, did.
See, now that last week it was interesting because they convinced me that, Population Zero isn't necessarily one you should show right away. As good as it is, as wonderful as it sets off the whole series, that it may not necessarily be the one you show first off, which I thought was interesting that they convinced me of that. My two guests, Jerry Lang and Billy Flynn. Bobby, what about you?
I don't think it would be the first one I would show someone, but I would show it to someone who's new to the series because it does. There's a lot in here. You get to learn a lot about Steve's powers with the with the bionic eye, the leaping, the running, the jumping. There's all of that's there, and you have the good Oscar Steve relationship. think if you're showing the show to someone for the first time, you want to make that people who have never seen the Bionic Man know what the Bionic Man sound effect is. So you probably should show them something for the things they're already expecting to see. So, and there are certainly other episodes that would work better as a first timer, but after you put second or third one, you show them.
Okay. All right. I got to say this time around, based on like the way we talked about it last week and based on the way I saw, like I said, there's a lot of bionic action, whether it's the smallest thing like knocking off the hubcap to the leaping down to the use of the bionic eye for the first time twice. I'm starting to lean towards, I might show this as a first time episode. My wife watched this one with me, and she's not the hugest fan, but she sat through the whole episode and had comments as she was going along. I don't know. To me, I might. I'm on the fence on this one.
It's a great episode for Oscar, even though he doesn't necessarily do a lot of the heavy lifting of the episode. He becomes a lot more important to the show this week than, say, last week, where he is mostly just Steve's boss.
Right. And sitting around waiting for Steve.
Right.
Which is
right. He's there at the beginning of the episode or in the end. He goes, Steve, go do this. And Steve gets back. He goes, good job, Steve.
Right.
Here we've got more of it.
Right. And we get the actual relationship. I mean, like you said, there, two distinct scenes showing the development of the two. See, that's why I think maybe, you might lean more towards this episode as a first timer.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because, like I said, I do like their relationship here.
Yeah. Sorry, guys. I've just excitedly now got a little word across the screen that I finally won a $6 million man mission vehicle. Woohoo! I'll be showing that off in a couple of weeks. and knowing that I actually lowballed my bid, I thought I would actually not get it. But this guy who put it up there only did it for a couple of days, so probably got missed by most fans. Nice. Yeah.
This is the crowd to ask for sure. Did you have the Steve Austin action figure as a child?
No.
Yes, I did.
Yeah, Bobby, you did. Yeah.
Did you take the rubber skin off of his arm?
Yes, I'm pretty sure I did. And I remember he had the eye. You could look through the back of his head.
Yeah.
But
look at that. I took that weird rubber condom off.
I also had the.
It's crazy. Look at him. Look at that stud.
As a kid, I didn't get this. I got this when I turned 35. Because my wife had heard the story of how I didn't get one as a child. My sisters had the Bionic Woman, but for some reason I wanted it. I used to, really quick story here. I used to there was a friend of ours that had everything. He had all the $6 Million Man toys. Drove me nuts because he would, have us over to play and stuff. And he didn't want to play with his $6 Million Man figures. He wanted to play with his Donnie and Marie action set. So it would drive me nuts because we're there and he's like playing along. There's Donnie and Marie and the figures and stuff, and they're all just sitting over there in a corner, Steve and stuff. And so finally, what I would do is because it came with a studio set, and it had little lamps and everything. So remember the episode where he catches a studio lamp and saves Farrah Fawcett's life? So I just did that. I was like, duh, 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 duh. Steve Austin jumps into the studio and saves Donnie and Maria. The kids screaming, going, stop it. We're not playing those toys. And it's like, why not? These are the cool ones. Oh, it's so sad. So sad. But then eventually I got
now. You can play with them all you want.
Exactly. with my as even Lee will back me up on this, action figure.
Yes.
Not a double. I love that when Lee and Lindsay were on the stage and Lindsay just kept going, "It's a doll, Lee. It's a doll." Oh, man. Gentlemen, thank you so much for being here tonight. This was a lot of fun.
Thanks for having us.
So before we go, Bobby, just really quick, how can people get a hold of you if they want to find out more about your writings or if they want to talk more about $6 Million Man with you?
Sure. BobbyNash.com is my website. There's links to all my et cetera. Hit me up. Usually it's at Bobby Nash. A couple of them, there's like Bobby Nash Writes on Instagram and whatever. But yeah, I'm easy to find. Come over. I'm always happy to chat with people.
And Ken, I know you're going to be continuing doing segments for us on the Chronic Rift on our In Review episodes, but how can people get a hold of you?
Well, your standard Facebook, Instagram, whatever the kids are doing these days. You can also find some of my writings. I've got a new independently published comic now called The Quick and the Dad that's on available on indieplanet.com. If you want to see a cute little Harvey Comics, Archie Comics, DC Marvel kind of pastiche. Just some little harmless fluff.
I love the title.
I've begun work on issue 7. It's the longest run of anything I've done so far, so it's all pretty cool.
Very cool. Very cool.
Very nice. Very nice.
Yeah. So, folks, that's going to do it then for this week. Tune in next Friday night, 9:30 p.m. here on Facebook Live. Steve must find the developer of a new laser system with the help of the developer's psychic daughter. Say that 10 times fast. In Operation Firefly. So until next time, everybody who is here tonight on Facebook Live, thank you so much for commenting here. And Ken, once again, thank you.
Thank you.
And Bobby Nash, thank you very much.
Oh, my pleasure. Next time we'll have better video.
Okay, there you go. So until then, folks, take care. Have a great week.
You have been listening to the OSI Files, hosted and produced by John S. Drew. If you would like to comment on anything you have heard on this podcast, please take a moment by writing us at osifiles6@gmail.com, commenting on our Facebook page, Twitter at OSI_Files, or visit us on the web at theosifiles.com. The OSI Files is a Lucky Shot production. I am the Alex 7000 Master Computer, and I am programmed to thank you.
For years, scientists have been trying to learn how the firefly produces light. And here it is. This laser is powered by a synthesis of chemical light energy, similar to that of a firefly. He's not going to get the kinks out of it, at least not for us. We suspect that he's been kidnapped.
This is Lee Majors, next on the $6 Million Man.
Susan Abbott?
Yes?
I'm Steve Austin.
Hello, Steve Austin.
Tomorrow morning, I do the final test on the laser. They knew that, and that's why they've sent this man.
His name is Steve Austin.